Okay, so today I'll just be going over my passages since Ashley is not here. And I'll just show you guys the passage of her answers, and we'll go over the car's passage in detail and do one more passage with you guys. So this was her passage, and I will be sending out the slides, so you can also go through the answers in more details after, since I didn't look at this passage beforehand. So I really can't explain it right now in the moment. Okay, so the car's passage. This is how I broke it down. So the first passage was talking about the street names and their meaning. The second paragraph was talking about the people behind the street and their names, and it mentions some examples such as, Brian, you had a question? What is question 2?
What's the question 2 for the vision passage?
Sorry, what?
Oh, yes, thank you. I just want to check the answer.
Oh yeah, okay, I can do the answers again. This was the answer to question 1. Question 2. Question 3. Question 4. Question 5. And question 6. Okay. So this passage was talking about the street naming and the significance behind that. Paragraph 3 mentioned the connection of the dates and things on the street. Paragraph 4 mentioned how the street names have a new meaning. Paragraph 5 discussed how they almost have a political tradition behind their names. And paragraph 6 talked about if you substitute a name, you're kind of changing the politics behind it. And the last paragraph talked about how people can get attached to a street name. Does anyone have any questions on the passage itself before we start to go over the answers? Okay, if not, we'll move on. So, which one of the following street names were not mentioned in the passage? Feel free to type your answer below, or you can even unmute and talk about why you picked that answer. So what did you guys say for question 1? Okay, so this answer is A. This is explicitly mentioned in the passage. People were mentioned in paragraph 2. Objects and things were mentioned in paragraph 3. And dates were mentioned in paragraph 3 as well. So events were not mentioned. We have a question. Are we expected to know other language?
I mean, in this question, the object is being referred in paragraph 3 in the end of the sentence. And the end of the sentence, after I check the answer, I use the Google Translator to find out the vocabulary Paul John. And Moulin is actually meant to be a common object in the everyday life, such as bread and milk. And I was not sure, like, how are we supposed to know this based on the structure if we don't know other language?
Okay, these were just the names of the street, you know? So that's not something you have to know the significance behind if they didn't explain it in the passage. So here it says, as names connected with actual things. So the names are connected to things as well. And the case of dates is also mentioned. So dates is mentioned in Rue du 19. That's the street name and date. And with actual things, so these are a thing like Port One.
How do you know how do you know based on the structure of the sentence that you know the Pong Zhang Pengwan and Muling mirrored object?
It says right here, as to names connected with actual things. So the author is explaining some street names are connected with objects and things. And he's giving an example. Who could say what was this is an street name, the name of a street I used to cross every day, or what was that street name? So the author's saying he doesn't know, but those are actual things that are represented by the street.
Oh, I understand now. Thank you. I was confused because I thought the thing could be anything.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, moving on to question 2. What do you guys say for that? So paragraph 5, the passage discussion of the political aspect of naming assumes which of the following? Okay. So yeah, politics is involved even in street naming. This was mentioned in paragraph 5. The other choices are not really the best answer. Politics are logically determined. That's not what we discussed. In paragraph 5, citizens do not welcome political acts. We don't discuss that either. And traditions are not political facts. That is too extreme to say that. Why not A? Political acts are logically determined. So the act of naming is more saying that politics is in everyday life. So a street is something you cross every day, and that's what paragraph 5 explains. So naming is a political act. It's a common tradition of everyday life and a tradition of political belief. So that's what the paragraph 5 is saying about the politics, as it can influence people's daily lives, and streets and their names are an example of that. Does that make more sense? Okay. Question 3. Given the information, one would reasonably assume that citizens would interpret a local government replacing the name of Martin Luther King Jr. as, yeah, so this was mentioned in the passage. And people would want to know why, and they should have an incredibly good reason. This was going back to paragraph 6, where he mentioned why we should, if you substitute names, you're changing the politics behind it, and you should have a really good reason to change the street name of Martin Luther King Jr. And we're not saying that you have something against their fans. That's kind of too much of an assumption to say that. But people would want to know why they changed it, and that's the best answer. It said you should have an incredibly good reason as to why you changed it, and they would definitely look into that. Question 4. So the author would most likely favor a policy renaming that, street renaming, yeah. Okay, anyone else? Please type your answer in the chat so we can all learn and see how we picked that answer. Okay, so the government policy, it is a decision that should involve people since it is a political action. So the author would probably favor something that asks for the citizens and their opinion on any change before they change something. It's not saying you should avoid it whenever possible. There might be reasons to change it, as the author mentioned, that but that it should be carefully changed because you will be changing the politics. if you substitute a name. So that's not saying that you should totally avoid it whenever possible. It didn't say to mention street prior names into account, and only change streets named for now forgotten reasons. That's also too extreme to do only that. So does this kind of make sense? Anyone have any questions? Okay. Moving on to question 5. So why was this anecdote mentioned? So in the last paragraph, we saw that they were changing one street name to another street name. And why was that included? And we were talking about in the last paragraph how people build an attachment to their place. So the best answer here would be C, because if they're attached to the street name, a new street name would clash with that identity and their sense of place because of that street name. So it builds kind of an identity to them. It's not saying the new name change would be unacceptable. That's not what that paragraph was saying. So we can go back real quick and read it. So one can say that naming a street is necessarily a political action since it imposes a tradition on the place. People can get quite attached with it. They can get upset when changes are made. So imagine the reaction of inhabitants who wake up surprised to find out that this street name where they led uneventful lives has suddenly changed to this other street name. So they're saying that people got attached to it and they wouldn't want to change it. So that's why A is not right. It's not saying B that quiet streets shouldn't have should keep unexciting names. That's not really the conclusion there. Establish how memorable names can change how a street feels. Right, so the name it's not talking about how the street feels, it's talking about how the people feel in that street and how would they feel if the street name changed. So the street itself is not changing, it's how the people can get attached and how their sense of surrounding would change. And their identity belonging to that street would change if the name of the street would change. Does that make more sense? Okay. Perfect. Okay, I'll say this about question 6. It's a little weird. So what do you guys say about question 6? Okay, great. Anyone that picked D, could you explain why you picked that?
Because basically the whole passage is talking about how they will commemorate, naming a street to commemorate someone or some kind of thing. So basically all the street name would have some kind of the meaning associated with it. But if you just naming first street, second street, or third street, that basically doesn't mean anything, which would defeat the purpose of this whole passage. The street name will be meaningless.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so if we have a common street name, that is going definitely against what, if we're using street names for political reasons and with a reason to represent those individuals and objects. So that is definitely going against that. I can also see why people would pick B. If local governments actually used apolitical names, whereas the paragraph did mention that politics is used. So that's why some people would pick B in that case. So
I didn't I didn't pick B because they mention some kind of object and also some kind of event, which it
Yeah,
doesn't in the second paragraph that does not 100% associate with politics.
right. That is correct. So good job explaining this. Thank you for doing that. So that's why the better answer would be D. A lot of people did end up choosing B in Jack Weston, so that's why I marked it as a throwaway question, just in case, because I do understand why some people would pick B, but the better answer would be D, yes. Okay, so we are going to do one more passage. And I will send that to you in a second. And I'll give you guys a couple minutes to do this, and then we'll come back and go over it. So let me know when you're ready, and I can start the timer. Okay, great. Go ahead and start then. Okay, great. How'd you guys find this passage? Am I still sharing my screen? Okay, great. Let's start to go over this then. Does anyone want to sum up the passage, or I can start and do it? Were there any questions on the passage itself? No? Okay. So we mostly addressed the renin-angiotensin system and the effects and how we can counter those using inhibitors and other things. And we kind of saw the effects of treatment on the system as well. We talked about the ACE inhibitors and how they can manage blood pressure. And these drugs can lower the blood pressure as well by reducing the ACE, which converts the angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. So you really want to understand this figure here. And then when you talk about ACE inhibitors have also inhibit the degradation of bradykinin. So you can see that here in that figure. And to do anything else. So we have the receptor blockers and direct renin inhibitors as well. Can we go over the graph? Okay, yeah, right here. Yes, let's get to it. And these drugs are effective and they do it by a different mechanism. So we're going to talk about insulin resistance and decreased glucose dispersal. And no, you don't need to know what bradykinin is if it's not mentioned in the passage. But in general, yes, you should know it. Yes, sorry, you should know that. Where are we? Okay, and then we have captopril, an ACE inhibitor, and some other things that are used for the treatment. We have two, this is a concentration of insulin, which is constant, and then we are determining the glucose activity. And this is a chart. Okay, so let's try to understand the figure. So, oh, I kind of made it small. Hold up, let me make it bigger so we can understand it. Oh, that's too big. Okay, can everyone see this well? Okay, great. So we're talking about the treatment with captopril, bradykinin, and eprosartan on glucose transport activity. We have controls, and then we have glucose uptake with absence and presence of insulin. And that's what we're measuring. We're measuring the glucose uptake. So in the vehicle treated, which is a control, we can see that where there was no glucose, it was around 100. When we added glucose, it shot up. And then this is the change between no glucose and having glucose. And it's not significant because there's no asterisk there. With captopril, we have a large increase when glucose is, or sorry, when insulin is added, and the change is really significant. This is just a control. The control is the same basically everywhere. Going over bradykinin, the change with insulin, again, is really significant as well. And then this is the last treatment. It is not significant. Okay, and then the last paragraph talks about a drug that is known to produce significant anti-hypertensive effects, and it does this through the direct inhibition of renin. Okay, so let's move on to the questions. Does anyone have any other questions on the graph, or are we good? Good? Okay. So question 1, what is the effect of aldosterone on blood pressure? Where is it synthesized, and what is a major site of action? What did you guys think for this? So type it in the chat and I'll start just explaining how to go over this question. So first of all, it's really easy to just think about the increase or decrease. So is aldosterone going to increase the blood pressure or going to decrease it? This is a memory question. So you should know that it increases it. So that would cross off C and D. Next thing you should know that it acts on the adrenal glands. So the best answer is B. So this is a memory question that you should know. So aldosterone increases the reabsorption of salt, which increases volume, which leads to an increase in blood pressure. It also acts on the adrenal glands at the distal tubules and the collecting ducts. Okay, question 2. So which treatment groups would drug X resemble? So this is looking back on the graph. So drug X, what does it do? It inhibits renin. So what would that do? Okay. Yeah, so drug X inhibits renin. If renin is inhibited, angiotensin would decrease based on our graph. And then drug X doesn't do anything to the degradation of bradykinin, whereas captopril would. So we can get rid of D and A. And it would be then the eprosartan group, but we can see that drug X and eprosartan don't inhibit bradykinin. And we know that because it just inhibits renin, which is involved just converting from angiotensin to angiotensin 1. It's not involved in this process, which is something that ACE would do. Does that make sense? Okay, so question 3, which of the following would activate the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system? So just think back to what we mostly talked about. Yeah, so this system controls the blood pressure, it maintains the blood pressure. So if the blood pressure were to decrease, it would activate and turn on to increase the blood pressure. Okay. Based on the passage, what is the association between treatment with captopril and insulin-resistant muscles? So we're looking at what captopril does and the graph, what happened when we added insulin. So insulin-resistant muscles just means that they don't respond as well to the normal bit of insulin. So you have to add more than usual.
Can you please go back to the passage and show me where do they talking about insulin resistant muscle?
Sure. I don't remember if it was mentioned directly. Oh man, hold up. Let me blow that graph away. Okay. So we talked about insulin here, saying that a lot of the hypertensive individuals demonstrate insulin resistance. So that means they don't respond well to normal amounts of insulin, so they need more. And now we're examining the effects on the glucose transport in insulin-resistant muscle. So that's where we kind of talked about it here. Make sense?
So the graph itself, does the graph itself about the insulin resistant muscle?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Is this one also being mentioned in the graph? Or is it something we need to connect the information, connect the dot?
Yeah, I don't remember what the graph says. Well, sorry, let's go back to the question. Yeah, so it's asking for the association between the treatments. And that's kind of what the graph is showing. Right, the graph is showing the captopril. Do you see right here in the first section? When we have insulin, the glucose transport increases a lot. That glucose uptake, right? So
Yes.
that's what the graph is saying on insulin-resistant muscle. So that's the type of muscle that was used. So that's just the only thing you have to look at.
Okay.
You see that it increases.
Mhm.
So the answer is going to be increase, but is it going to be in the available insulin or the insulin, or is it the insulin response? What do you guys think?
There will be insulin response.
Yeah, correct. So the available insulin was just a constant. It was given around 2 in the passage, but the graph is describing the response to insulin. Does that make sense? Okay. Last question. So what would happen to the heart after treatment with captopril? What do you guys think? Yeah, do you want to explain this?
Because the cardiac output is equal to the heart rate multiplied by the stroke volume, and the renal system basically is the whole system talking about how the renal angiotensin system will increase the blood pressure, and part of the mechanism is increased by the blood volume. And if the drug is anti-renal regulated system, which would like inhibit the action of the mechanism, then you will decrease the stroke volume. And if you decrease the stroke volume, according to the equation, you will also decrease the cardiac output.
Yeah, that's correct. So since the captopril was an ACE inhibitor, we would decrease the effects of the system, and that would decrease, in turn, the stroke volume and cardiac output, what Brian just described. So thank you for sharing that. I think that was the last question. Do you guys have any other comments or anything like that? If not, thank you so much for coming, and I'm sorry we weren't able to do all the passages, but we'll send out the slides and go over them next time, hopefully. Yeah. And if you are new, you can drop your email in the chat so we can add you to our future topic sessions. But otherwise, I will send out an email with the recording, and we'll go from there. Okay, thank you.